Welcome to this edition of Peak Performers Podcast with your host, Thor Conklin. Thor will be sharing the necessary tools, strategies, and psychology you'll need to become a peak performer in any area of your life or business.
Welcome back to another episode of Peak Performers Podcast. I'm your host, Thor Conklin, and we have an amazing show for you coming up today and an amazing guest. We have Buck Joffrey, MD, is a surgeon turned serial entrepreneur, asset manager, and podcaster. Dr. Joffrey finished his surgical training in 2008. Actually, not training. Yeah, physical training in 2008. Since then, he's started multiple 7- and 8-figure businesses and has amassed a substantial portfolio of investments in real estate, energy, internet, and the health sector. He is a financial educator. He's the #1 bestseller author of The 7 Secrets of Eternal Wealth. Doctor, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
We got through that. What the audience didn't see was the first take of that bio, which was vast. So, the audience listening today is made up of entrepreneurs, business owners, CEOs, and as profitability consultants, that's our business. We see this all the time. High earners that are doing great at earning money, not so great at actually keeping it. What's going on?
Well, they're two different things. And I think that that's the first thing that I think is a realization for most people, because you can see the most creative and incredible entrepreneurs who are, making tons and tons of money, right? And then all of a sudden they make their money and they don't know what to do with it. And then they invest like their grandma, right? So that's the thing. It's a completely different, I think, mindset. But I think that my perspective is that, I'm an entrepreneur first, and I'm a physician. I happen to be a physician, but I'm really an entrepreneur. And when I started actually making money, that was one of the first things I was thinking about as well. Geez, why not use this creativity that I have as an entrepreneur and actually use that to grow my money as well? And that's just a small mind shift, but it has made a tremendous difference for me.
And besides investing like their grandmother, what are the mistakes that you see with a lot of clients where they just fall into the same trap over and over again?
Well, I think the trap is conventional financial wisdom. It's like any conventional wisdom. Listen, most people, particularly, people I deal with, a lot of physicians and a lot of high-paid professionals who are highly trained. They're people who tended to do well in school, and they kind of, took this conveyor belt of school and they did really well on it, right? Went from one grade and plopped information, they absorbed it. Next, they did the same, and then the next thing you know, they're done with school and there's no more curriculum. So they look around and try to figure out where to get that information. And usually that's when we defer to conventional wisdom. Conventional wisdom, unfortunately, can often be wrong. Like the world is flat, for example. That was conventional wisdom for some time. And conventional wisdom in the world of investing is to effectively, become a passive person when it comes to investing, to kind of give your money over to somebody else. And so I think the problem really stems with, conventional financial wisdom, which is you can't do it yourself. You need a professional to do this for you. And that there is this fixed way of investing, which happens to be very favorable to Wall Street and to Wall Street's minions.
Yeah, it's almost like Vegas. When you walk into a casino, if you go to the craps table, for example, and you see the odds on the table, that is not the bet you want to place. First of all, you shouldn't make any bet in a casino.
Yeah.
But it's the odds that they don't tell you about. Being behind the line, if you're familiar with craps, that's where the odds are. They're not in your favor, but at least they're close to being even. It's, the same thing with investing. When you turn on the TV and you see all these expensive advertisements about investing and investment firms, somebody's paying for that. That's coming out of their earnings, which is
right
out of your pocket.
Right, exactly.
So it's a conventional wisdom. It's a non-conventional wisdom, really, that I think traditionally has been in the hands of the ultra wealthy is now starting to, we're starting to see products and services come into the marketplace that's for, I don't want to say the average Joe, but you don't need a $10 million portfolio in order to take advantage of some of these things. What are some of the changes that are coming?
I think it's being recognized that there is ultimately two tiers of investors in this world. I mean, and those are typically, you're going to have the poor middle class and upper middle class, including doctors, for example, people who are highly trained but maybe are not ultra wealthy. And then there's the ultra wealthy. And the ultra wealthy generally have a different set of rules. They have different opportunities. It's not like they're trying to hide something from everybody else. It just is. It's just the way it's been. So I think that, there has been recognition of these differences in recent years. I mean, even with the Jobs Act, with the Obama administration, the idea of making crowdfunding available, making it so that people can participate in things that used to only be available to, quote unquote, accredited investors, people who were mid to high net worth, those things are becoming more available to pretty much anybody. Now, as you mentioned, there's also products out there that until very recently were really only available to people who were 10 million plus. And those things are becoming, increasingly available to investors who are in that mid 6-figure per year class. And I think that is, I think Wall Street is starting to see that there's opportunity there. And as a side effect of that, we're actually getting some opportunities come our way on the professional side.
What do you think is going to happen to the middle class? I've been studying this for probably the last 10 years, and I'm really starting to see, as I think a lot of people are, a real divide. The middle class is just evaporating. The wealthy are getting wealthier, and the poor are getting poorer. What are we going to do?
I think, it's funny. I think that it is a major problem, and I think it's more than just. It's not just a problem for the middle class. It's a problem for the wealthy.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
And I think that there's a lot of recognition of that. Even the Cook brothers, right? The Koch brothers, yeah. Cook, whatever. I mean, those guys have brought it up, and it's not like they're known to be big time philanthropists, but there's worry about it. And because if there's no middle class, basically you've got a two-class system in which one class has all the power, all the money, and the other side doesn't have any. And what does that result in? Well, history suggests that suggests in often civil unrest and violence, etc. So I think that is something that a lot of people have recognized, and hopefully we can, try to address.
Do you see our workforce is also changing as well, that a lot of jobs that exist today won't exist in 20 years. AI will take over some of it. Robotics will take over some of it, which I think will actually put even more pressure on it. Do you see do you see people working into their 80s going forward? Social Security is not going to be there for them.
Yeah, I mean, here's, I think, kind of where I'm concerned about when I start, really my messaging becomes, I think, more relevant to that discussion is that, I think that if you look at the conventional financial wisdom, and there's this paradigm, right, of effectively investing your money in a portfolio of stocks, bonds, and mutual funds through a wealth advisor. And, you're hoping, based on historical fact, again, that you're going to get approximately 7% return, that inflation is going to be approximately 2%, and that, over a period of time, you'll be able to accumulate money so that you can take out 4% per year, and that'll last you the rest of your life. I mean, that is fundamentally the whole, that's the game plan. And if you look at that and you really, if you look at that, you got to start thinking, oh my gosh, I mean, where did this game plan come from? And what are the chances of it going to work? I mean, maybe it'll work. It's worked in the past, but does that mean it's going to work in the future? I mean, right now we have $20 trillion in national debt. And that's, quadrupled over the last 15 years compared to the entire U.S. history before that. We have, we have, even though the economy looks like it's doing well, we've got a lot of asset ballooning right now. We have a huge demographic shift that's coming up here with the baby boomers ultimately all retiring. I mean, this is not a world that we've seen before. I mean, even interest rates. You look at interest rates, almost 0% for a decade. We've not seen that in history. So, and then you take that whole financial lack of any sort of direction there, and then you compound that with the fact that people are living longer. Right? And that's where my MD comes in, of course. If we look at the advancements in medicine, particularly those that look like they're coming down the pipeline in the next 20 years, I think it's very likely you're going to see people living, frequently past the age of 100. And no one's planning for that economically.
Yeah. Yeah, it's incredible. The mortgage rates that you just talked about, or interest rates, tick up mortgage rates 1-2%. What ends up happening to the housing market? People aren't buying the house based on the price. They're buying the house based on how much mortgage they can afford.
Yeah, that's basically it. I mean, I think there's a lot of things that are kind of, teetering. They're not really that secure. And we have a lot of people who are really bullish on the economy, but it's really, at the end of the day, it is, it's sort of like a pig with lipstick, right? Because it's all based on these artificially low interest rates. That's what the entire economy has been growing on in the past decade. So,
yeah, and the infusions. What were those things? Stimulus packages.
Right, stimulus, right. Quantitative easing.
Let's send everybody a check for $600 and re-energize the market and the
right.
And on inflation, let's not forget Germany after World War II was in dire straits. How did they get out of their crisis, their financial crisis?
Right.
Inflation. Great way to get out of it.
Well, people forget, one of the things that people forget is that, there's really only two ways to pay off your debt, right? You either pay it off by having GDP growth, right? You're going to have GDP growth and excess tax revenues that are going to pay off that debt, start to pay it down. Or you're going to erode that debt by making the currency itself, the value less, effectually diluting the currency, and that's inflation. So you really only have two options. So,
or default, which we're not going to.
Or you could default. Yeah.
All right. So now that we painted such a lovely picture, everybody on this podcast is like jumping up and down.
Yeah,
is great. I'm going to live to 100, but I'm not going to be able to afford it. Give us some strategies. What do we do?
Yeah. So, I mean, my first take is this: is that I think everybody fundamentally, especially if you're a successful business owner, a successful professional, you need to potentially look at what your current belief system is about your investments and how you invest, and consider that, it may not be the right thing for you to do. And that in fact, you yourself may be smart enough to start taking a little bit more interest in where your money goes. And I think that's the first step. The next step is to say, what is it that I really believe that, is going to, that's safe for me? What do I understand? Because I think one of the issues with Wall Street is that they like to layer on layers of complexity so that you don't understand stuff. My ethos is very much to look at investments that you can understand and that have been around forever, and try to get involved with them. I call it real asset investing.
Some examples of that.
So, for example, let me just take you with some principles that I think of are good, useful principles, and to really break it down into, it's not just about stocks, bonds, and mutual funds. If you look at the wealthiest families in the world over the past, several centuries, these families basically invest in things that produce cash flow, right? The idea that we started investing for capital gains and for things to appreciate is a relatively new phenomenon, right? the idea of actually owning things that produce income is a very old idea. And so let's go back to that. First of all, instead of buying stocks, let's consider buying income. So that's one thing. Investing in things that you understand. Again, complexity doesn't help anybody. It ultimately ends up just padding somebody else's pocketbook. And so if you can't understand it, if you can't just draw out how this thing makes money on the back of an envelope, then don't invest in it. Investing in real things, again, people talk about businesses that have been around for a long time, right? And stocks that have been around for a long time. I used to live in Chicago until recently. You look around, there's apartment buildings that are over 100 years old everywhere. Every one of those is a business. I'm not just saying that, everybody should just go out and do real estate, but start looking at things that make sense. They've been around forever, right? And they're still there, and they're still making money, right? And fundamentally, I think that's, those are the key things. I also like to use an equation that I think is really important. And I call it, my show is called Wealth Formula Podcast. And what I do is I talk about this in depth, but really there's a simple math behind wealth creation. And the simple math is that wealth is equal to, and I borrow this from Newtonian physics, but wealth is equal to mass times velocity, and then ultimately all of that multiplied by leverage. And when I say mass times velocity, what I'm talking about is mass is first, how much do you actually invest? Because if you're not investing very much of your money or a very small fraction of your money, it doesn't matter what your returns are, you're not going to get very far. So trying to create more amount of money to invest. The second thing is velocity. And velocity is really how quickly you can turn over that investment and then invest in again in something else, right? So a big play, that I like, for example, in real estate, is I like to invest in things that I can potentially put in, $100,000 or something like that, and then get my money back in 3 years because of a refinance event, and then invest that into something else while I'm still making money in the first project.
Got it.
So that's velocity, how quickly you can move the same money and redeploy it. And then last thing is leverage. Now, this is something that I think that a lot of people are a little bit scared of. And I think in business owners, it's probably less of a foreign concept than it is for professionals like doctors. But ultimately, the idea of creating good debt, right? Using debt to create more wealth. I can say that I honestly believe it is virtually, unless you're some kind of an entertainer, you win a lottery or something, it's virtually impossible to create significant amount of wealth without utilizing debt, and that's leverage. So if you can take mass and velocity and add leverage, that's the mathematical way of creating wealth. Now, from that, the rest of it's, the devil's in the details, right? But I mean, there's lots of layers to build on top of that.
So give us some examples. Obviously, the first thing that comes to mind is commercial real estate or real estate in general. I mean, that you described that to me. Are there any other asset classes that fall into that come to mind?
Well, let me give you a simple concept that I think this is one of those strategies that used to be only available to the 10 million plus group. And it's a really interesting concept, and it revolves around an insurance product, life insurance product. It's leveraged index universal life. And it has to be structured very appropriately. But in a nutshell, this is what it can do. So imagine having an account, an investment account, that your fees on it are about 50 basis points. So they're about 0.5% per year. So really much better than typically what people are getting with anything else. And on top of that, you can invest that money and track the S&P 500. You track it, and you can take up to, say, 12 or 13% on an up year, right? You can follow it, and you can take up to 12 or 13%. But if the market crashes, you don't have to participate in any of the losses.
Okay.
Not a bad deal, right?
No.
In fact, it's such a product that if you're a bank, you may say, hey, I like what you're doing over there. Can I add to this and create a little bit of leverage for you? And how about instead of you getting a policy where you're contributing $20,000 per year, why don't you put in 20 and I'll put in another 40 or 60,000? And then in that situation, what happens is if this S&P 500 even does 7% in a given year, because of the leverage, it actually comes out to about 20% IRR.
Interesting.
Right? So that product actually has mass because you're putting in money. It has velocity because you're using the actual, the S&P 500's movement in and of itself. And it has leverage, and the leverage is created by the bank. You're getting bank. And then you have guardrails on this product, literally because you're not taking downside.
Interesting. And are they using the upside over 12 to buy options on?
Yep, it's an options play. It's a complete options play, but it works. And we've looked at this through some of the broker that I work with on this. We've used it. We've stress tested it through the Great Depression, through hyperinflation of the 80s. They've always come out ahead.
Interesting. And what happens? Is there a death benefit on the insurance as well?
There is, yeah. And so what happens is that it also becomes a tremendous, estate planning vehicle as well. But the reality is that the reality is that this is a massively is a tremendous strategy even just for retirement. I can tell you, just from a personal anecdote, that I'm in the middle of underwriting on one of these. Now, if you are worth a certain amount, say if you are worth 10 million plus, you wouldn't even necessarily have to put any money into the policy. You can do it all based on, you can basically take 100% loan on this and just have collateral. But I am looking at a policy that literally, I don't have to put anything else in, and I just use a retirement or an investment account as collateral that over the course of 15 years comes out at the end of it would result in $1 million per year in income for the rest of my life.
Wow.
Yeah. So this is the real deal. Obviously it just depends on your income level, right? But you can certainly, most people who are making six figures can qualify for one of these plans at this point. And this is, again, very recent. This used to be just for that, the type of product that I just told you I'm doing, where you don't put in any money. But even for the mid six figures, or even if you're making $150,000 per year, this is something that you can do, and you can contribute $10,000, $20,000 a year, have effectively, this kind of tracking, guardrails, leverage, and on top of that, you've got tax-free growth too. That's the other benefit of these things.
And can you structure this through an LLC or an S Corp, C Corp? Is there any sort of tax advantage? Could this be I'm thinking of a Keyman Life program. Where
you could do it in a variety of different ways that way. But I think you could do Keyman. You certainly can do that.
Where it would be owned by the corporation. I don't know if
there are some of those options. I'm less versed on it, but my insurance partner obviously would be a better person to talk to on that. But certainly, from an individual standpoint, just having it in the insurance account alone gives you, estate planning, asset protection, tax advantages. It's sort of like having to me, that strategy, which we've been calling Velocity Plus because of the whole equation, really reminds me of sort of a Roth IRA because it's post-tax money, but it's the Roth IRA on steroids and with guardrails
and with leverage.
What's
the bank debt on that? What's the
it's
cost?
usually 1% above LIBOR.
Okay, all right, that makes sense. Fascinating.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, it's about if you follow the crowd, you're going to end up where the crowd goes.
Right.
And where the crowd is going right now is not someplace you want to end up.
Yeah. I just think you can do a lot better. That's my message.
I'm saying that the crowd's getting ready to get massacred. When I look around and I see our savings rates in the United States, I see people that their net worth. It was funny. I was just at dinner with a bunch of friends, and there's a very well-to-do country club here. I was playing golf the other day, and we were talking after golf. We were sitting around the table, and here's some very high earners at the table talking about how they're 2 or 3 paychecks away from being wiped out. They're so far leveraged. They're like, the wife's down at the beach house, and I'm just trying to hold everything together. It's like, what are you doing?
Yeah, and it's bad leverage, right? It's not actually making them money, right?
Yeah. No. Yeah, they think the beach house is an asset, or it's actually, it's sucking money out of your
right.
every year. Some advice to the listeners before we wrap up.
Sure.
If there's one thing that you could leave with everybody to ponder, think about, what would it be?
One thing, I think the one thing to think about, again, is I think for an entrepreneurial group, and again, as a fellow entrepreneur, normally I'm not talking to entrepreneurs. Normally I'm talking to a bunch of, doctors and lawyers and software engineers who don't think outside of the box. But I challenge you as a creative entrepreneur to look at your investments the way you look at being creative in your business. Because you can just you can take, your creativity and just figure out how to make more and more money, but you can also use some of that creativity to make your life a lot easier and just have that money working for you a little bit better than it currently is. And believe me, I mean, what's really exciting and fun for me to do is just to kind of get behind the veil and kind of uncover a lot of these things. Because every time I think I know it all, I don't, right? And every time I get into a different, net worth or income category myself, something else pops up and I'm like, holy cow, I can't, no one told me about that one either. And so I'm just saying it can be pretty fun. I mean, it may not sound super exciting, but, on the other hand, it's like if you're running a business and that gets you going, I mean, starting to, really push into this, financial world of the wealthy and the affluent, the ultra affluent, I think it can be pretty fun and it can be interesting. And I think you owe it to yourself as a successful entrepreneur to do it.
Buck, thank you very much. If the audience has any questions, want to reach out to you, how do they get a hold of you?
Well, I have my own podcast. As you know, it's a Wealth Formula podcast. You can also, simply go to wealthformula.com, which is a website. I also have this book that's fairly simple in terms of the concepts that I talk about. And it's, but it gives you a little bit of sense how I see the world. And it's 7 Secrets of Eternal Wealth. And you could just download that as well. You can go to 44222. You can text me at 44222 and just type Wealth Formula, one word. And you can get that as well. But certainly, if anybody wants to know about any of these products, shoot me an email at buck@wealthformula.com, and I'll be happy to answer.
Buck, thank you very much for coming on. I think the timing of this was perfect. We're at a part, I think in our history as a nation, I think in the market, what's going on with our debt, we need solutions. And if we keep doing the same things that we've been doing, we're going to keep getting the same results. And we definitely need some alternatives. So I appreciate you being on today, and I appreciate you digging into these things.
Thanks for having me, Thor.
Thank you.